What if your vegetables are not failing because you need a bigger garden, but because some of them would rather grow in pots? That sounds backwards at first. Most of us grow up thinking the ground is always the best place for a vegetable. More soil, more space, more room for roots, more natural conditions. And in many cases, that is true. A healthy garden bed can be wonderful. But here is the part many beginner gardeners discover the hard way. Not every patch of ground is healthy, loose, rich, sunny, and easy to manage. Sometimes, the ground is heavy clay. Sometimes it dries into a crust. Sometimes it holds too much water. Sometimes it is full of weeds, rocks, tree roots, insects, disease problems, or shade at the wrong time of day. A pot changes that story. A pot does not magically make every vegetable grow better, and it will not fix bad watering, poor light, or a container that is too small. But for the right vegetable, a pot becomes a controlled little growing system. You choose the soil, you choose the drainage, you choose the position. You can move it closer to the kitchen, away from afternoon heat, or into a sunnier corner. You can inspect the leaves more easily. You can keep weeds out. And when you match the right crop with the right container, a small patio can start producing food that feels surprisingly close to a real garden. Before we name the first vegetable, remember one simple rule. A pot only works better when it solves a real problem. If your garden soil is already deep, rich, loose, and full of life, the ground may be better for many crops. But if your soil is compacted, rocky, weedy, too wet, too dry, or simply unavailable because you only have a balcony or patio, then the right container can give certain vegetables exactly what they need. There is one more idea that helps this whole video make sense. In a traditional garden bed, the soil is a shared world. Every plant is affected by the same drainage, the same weeds, the same underground roots, the same slope, the same pests, and the same weather exposure. In a container, each crop gets its own separate growing zone. That separation is powerful. It means the lettuce does not have to live in the same hot, dry corner as the pepper. The spinach does not have to sit beside a thirsty tomato. The herbs do not have to fight with weeds. You can build the conditions around the crop instead of forcing every crop to accept the same garden bed. This is especially helpful for beginners because it turns gardening into smaller decisions. Instead of trying to fix an entire backyard, you only have to set up one good pot. Instead of guessing whether the whole garden drains well, you can check one container. Instead of losing 10 seedlings in a weedy bed, you can protect a small group of plants where you can see them every morning. That is why container gardening can feel less intimidating. It makes the garden understandable, but control also creates responsibility. A pot depends on you more than the ground does. It has limited soil volume. It dries faster. Nutrients can wash through faster. Roots cannot travel beyond the container to search for help. So the best container crops are not the ones you ignore. They are the ones where your attention pays off. The vegetables on this list all give you a clear reason to use a pot, and they all reward you when the pot is chosen with purpose. So let's start with the vegetable that proves a small, shallow container can sometimes beat a full garden bed: lettuce. Lettuce is one of the best examples of a vegetable that often becomes easier in pots, not because it is difficult in the ground, but because it is sensitive to the exact things containers help you control. Lettuce has a shallow root system compared with many fruiting crops, so it does not need a huge deep bed to be useful. What it needs is loose soil, steady moisture, and protection from stress. In the ground, lettuce can struggle when the soil dries too fast, when weeds compete with the young plants, when mud splashes onto the leaves, or when the afternoon sun turns tender greens, bitter and tired. In a wide, shallow container, lettuce becomes much more manageable. You can fill that container with a light potting mix that drains well, but still holds moisture. You can sow a small patch of leaf lettuce instead of trying to manage an entire garden row. You can place the pot where it receives gentle morning sun, and then move it or shade it when the weather becomes too hot. That mobility is a real advantage. Lettuce does not want to be punished by heat all day. A container lets you treat it like a crop that needs care. not like a crop that must survive whatever the garden bed gives it. There is another reason lettuce feels so rewarding in pots. The harvest is close and visible. A container of lettuce near the back door or on a patio invites you to cut a few outer leaves whenever you need them. You do not have to wait for the entire plant to become huge. You can harvest lightly and often, letting the center continue to grow. This is one of the easiest ways to make a container garden feel alive, because every few days you can see the leaves fill back in. The mistake with lettuce is usually not planting it in a pot. The mistake is using a container that dries out too fast, placing it in harsh heat, or letting the plants become crowded. Lettuce likes room for airflow. It likes moisture, but not soggy soil. It likes light, but not brutal heat. If you give it a wide container, good potting mix, and a location that avoids the worst afternoon sun, it may be cleaner, easier, and more useful than lettuce planted in a neglected garden bed. Lettuce is not just easy, because it can grow quickly. It is easy because a container lets you protect it from the exact things that make it struggle in the ground. And if lettuce makes a container garden feel fresh, the next vegetable makes it useful almost every day: herbs. Herbs are easy to underestimate. A tomato plant looks more exciting, a cucumber vine looks more dramatic. A basket of peppers makes a better photo. But if you actually cook at home, a pot of herbs may become one of the most valuable containers you grow. Basil, parsley, cilantro, dill, chives, and other soft herbs do not need a massive garden bed to change the way you use your kitchen. They need to be close enough that you remember to harvest them. That is the biggest reason herbs often perform better in pots than in the ground for everyday gardeners. The best herb garden is not always the largest one. It is the one you actually use. When herbs are tucked far away in a garden row, many people forget to cut them until they are too tall, flowering, woody, or tired. When herbs are in small or medium pots near the kitchen door, they become part of daily life. You step outside, pinch a few basil leaves, cut a little parsley, harvest some cilantro, and the plant keeps giving, because you keep interacting with it. Pots also let you separate herbs that prefer different conditions. Basil likes warmth and steady moisture, but it does not want to sit in soggy soil. Cilantro often prefers cooler conditions and may bolt quickly in heat. Parsley grows at a steadier pace and can handle a little different treatment. In the ground, these plants may end up together in one patch, even though they do not all behave the same way. In containers, each herb can have its own small world. Another advantage is control. Herbs can be sensitive to overwatering, poor drainage, and competition. A container with drainage holes and a good potting mix gives you a cleaner start. You can rotate the pot if the plant leans toward the light. You can move tender herbs when weather changes. You can bring a pot closer to a sunny wall or move it away from a scorching surface if the leaves start to wilt. This is not complicated gardening. It is simply easier observation. The common mistake is cutting herbs the wrong way. Many beginners either do not cut at all, which lets the plant get tall and tired, or they cut too low and remove too much at once. Herbs do best when you harvest in a way that encourages new growth. With basil, for example, cutting above a set of leaves can encourage branching. With parsley or cilantro, taking outer stems carefully can keep the plant useful longer. The exact method depends on the herb, but the principle is simple. Harvest often enough to keep the plant productive, but not so aggressively that you exhaust it. A herb pot does not need to look impressive to be useful. It only needs to be close enough that you actually harvest from it. That is why herbs belong high on this list. A small pot near your kitchen can give more value than a large herb patch you forget to visit. Now, let's move from leaves you cut often to one of the fastest root crops a beginner can grow in a container: radishes. Radishes are small, but they reveal one of the biggest secrets of container gardening. Roots care more about soil texture than the size of your backyard. When people imagine root crops, they often assume the ground is automatically better. But a root crop growing in hard, rocky, compacted soil does not care that it has a big yard around it. It cares about whether the root can expand smoothly. If the soil is tight, crusted, full of stones, or crowded with other roots, the radish may stay small, split, become misshapen, or turn woody before it becomes satisfying. A container solves this problem beautifully. Radishes do not need a very deep pot compared with long carrots or large root crops. They need a container that is wide enough to space them properly and filled with loose, fine-textured soil. In that kind of environment, the root has less resistance. You can also see what is happening more easily. You know where the seedlings are, you know whether they are too crowded, you can thin them before they compete. You can water the container consistently instead of hoping a garden bed stays evenly moist. Radishes are also psychologically powerful for beginners. They give you a visible lesson in how soil affects roots. When you pull a clean radish from a pot, it feels like proof that the system is working. You started with a small seed, you gave it loose soil, you kept the moisture steady, and now there is something crisp and real in your hand. That kind of harvest builds confidence. But radishes are not automatic. The most common mistake is sowing them too thickly and refusing to thin them. Every radish needs space to swell. If the seedlings are packed together, they may produce leaves, but not good roots. Another mistake is letting the container dry out and then soaking it heavily. Radishes prefer consistency. Stress can affect texture and flavor. A third mistake is using heavy garden soil in the pot. If the pot is filled with dense soil from the yard, you lose the very advantage the container was supposed to give you. Think of radishes as a test of container discipline. The crop is simple, but it teaches important habits. Use the right soil, space the seedlings, water evenly, and harvest before the root becomes overgrown. In a poor garden bed, radishes can be disappointing. In a wide container of loose mix, they can become one of the quickest ways to feel successful. And once you understand that roots care about texture, the next vegetable makes even more sense, because it is all about giving roots the right depth. Mini carrots. Carrots are where many gardeners learn that not all varieties belong in the same setup. A long carrot variety wants depth, loose soil, and a clear path downward. If you plant it in shallow, rocky, compacted ground, the root may fork, twist, stop short, or grow into strange shapes. Sometimes that is funny. Sometimes it is charming. But if you want useful, straight, tender carrots, soil condition matters a lot. This is where mini carrots or short carrot varieties can be excellent for containers. The key is not to pretend every carrot will thrive in any pot. The key is to choose a variety that matches the container. A shorter carrot in a deep enough pot filled with loose, fine, stone-free potting mix may have a better experience than a carrot forced into heavy backyard soil. You are not trying to grow a giant carrot in a tiny bowl. You are matching the root to the space. The container advantage begins before the carrot even forms. Carrot seeds are small and can be slow to establish. They need the top layer of soil to stay consistently moist during germination. In a garden bed, that surface layer may dry out, crust over, or get disturbed. In a pot, you can watch it closely. You can water gently. You can keep the surface from drying too quickly. You can place the container where it is easy to check every day. That attention matters because carrot seedlings are delicate at the beginning. Once the carrots are growing, spacing becomes important. Many people sow too heavily and then avoid thinning because they do not want to waste seedlings. But crowded carrots compete, and crowded roots do not become their best selves. In a container, it is easier to see the little rows, thin carefully, and maintain the spacing the crop needs. Again, the pot is not magic. It simply makes the details easier to control. The most important mistake to avoid is choosing the wrong container. A shallow tray may be fine for lettuce, but it is not the right home for carrots unless the variety is extremely short. Mini and round types can work in smaller depths, while longer types need much more room. If your container is not deep enough, the carrot will tell you underground, where you cannot see the problem until harvest. So set the crop up correctly from the start. With carrots, the question is not whether you have a garden. The question is whether the root can travel downward without fighting hard soil. For many small space growers, a deep container with loose mix gives a better answer than the backyard ground. Now we are leaving the small, fast crops and moving into the plant most people dream of growing in summer containers: tomatoes. Tomatoes are the crop that can make a container garden feel real. A pot of lettuce is fresh. A pot of herbs is useful. A pot of radishes is satisfying. But a healthy tomato plant with green leaves, yellow flowers, and ripening fruit changes the whole mood of a patio. It makes the space feel like a garden, even if there is no garden bed anywhere in sight. But tomatoes also expose every shortcut. A tomato in the wrong container is not forgiving. If the pot is too small, the soil dries out quickly, the roots become stressed, and the plant can swing between thirsty and soaked. If there is no support, the plant sprawls, snaps, or becomes hard to manage. If the potting mix is poor, the plant may grow weakly. If the location is too shady, flowers and fruit suffer. This is why tomatoes can be both one of the best container vegetables and one of the easiest to disappoint. So when we say tomatoes can grow better in pots than in the ground, we have to be precise. A tomato may perform better in a pot when the garden soil is heavy, disease-prone, compacted, cold, or difficult to amend. A container lets you start with fresh potting mix. It lets you improve drainage. It lets you position the plant in the sunniest part of your patio. It lets you keep the plant close enough that you notice watering needs, pests, yellowing leaves, or support problems early. For a busy gardener, that closeness matters. Variety choice matters too. If you have a small patio, look for tomatoes that fit containers better, dwarf types, patio types, or determinate varieties that stay more compact than huge, indeterminate vines. That does not mean you can never grow a larger tomato in a pot, but the larger the plant, the more serious the container must be. More plant means more roots, more water demand, more support, and more attention. Beginners often fail not because tomatoes hate pots, but because they place a full-size tomato in a container that is too small for the job. Watering is the heart of container tomato success. In the ground, soil volume can buffer mistakes. In a pot, the plant depends on the limited moisture inside that container. On hot days, a tomato can use water quickly. If the pot dries out completely and then gets soaked, the plant experiences stress. The goal is not constant wetness. The goal is steady moisture with good drainage. A mulch layer on top of the potting mix can help reduce evaporation. Checking the soil regularly helps more than guessing from a distance. Support is another non-negotiable. Tomatoes need a cage, stake, trellis, or some structure depending on the variety. Put the support in early, before the plant becomes heavy and awkward. A container tomato loaded with fruit can become top-heavy, especially in wind. A sturdy container and support system make the difference between a beautiful patio plant and a tangled problem. There is also a cleanliness advantage. When tomatoes sprawl on the ground, leaves and fruit may touch soil, making moisture and disease issues harder to manage. In a container with support, the plant can be lifted, pruned lightly when appropriate, and observed closely. Airflow improves when the plant is not crowded. Harvest becomes easier because the fruit is right there, at hand level or near the patio path. Tomatoes are the crop that can make a container garden feel real, but they are also the crop that exposes every shortcut you take with pot size, watering, and support. Give them a serious container, a sunny position, steady care, and a variety that fits your space, and they may reward you more reliably than a plant struggling in poor ground. And if tomatoes are the dramatic crop, the next vegetable is quieter, steadier, and often one of the most beautiful plants you can keep in a pot: peppers. Peppers are excellent container candidates because they are naturally more compact than many tomato plants, and they often look neat, ornamental, and productive at the same time. A pepper plant in a pot can sit beautifully on a sunny patio, holding glossy green leaves, small flowers, and fruit that changes color as it ripens. Sweet peppers, hot peppers, and small snacking peppers can all work in containers when the pot size, light, and watering are right. One reason peppers can do well in pots is warmth. Peppers appreciate warm conditions, and containers often warm up faster than garden soil. This can be useful in places where spring soil is slow to heat, or where a sunny patio creates a warmer microclimate. But warmth is only helpful when the plant is not stressed. A black or dark pot in extreme heat can also get too hot, and a small container can dry out quickly. So again, the container is an advantage only when it is managed well. Peppers like consistency. They do not want to swing wildly between dry roots and soggy roots. They need good drainage, but they also need enough soil volume to hold moisture between watering. A medium to large container is usually much better than a tiny decorative pot. The plant may look small at first, but once it begins flowering and carrying fruit, it needs a stable root zone. In the ground, peppers can be slowed down by cold, compacted, wet soil. They may also get lost among larger plants or shaded by a crowded bed. In a pot, you can give a pepper its own sunny position. You can rotate it if it leans. You can move it to a warmer spot early in the season or protect it when weather changes. You can inspect the undersides of leaves and the developing fruit more easily. For small space gardeners, that kind of access is valuable. The most common mistake with peppers is impatience, combined with overfeeding or inconsistent watering. Some gardeners see slow growth and keep adding fertilizer, especially high nitrogen fertilizer, which can encourage leaves at the expense of fruit. Others let the pot dry down too hard, then water heavily. Peppers reward steady care more than dramatic intervention. Give them sun, warmth, drainage, steady moisture, and time. The secret with peppers is patience. But patience only works when the roots are not constantly stressed by cold, soggy, or dry soil. In the right pot, peppers can become one of the most satisfying patio vegetables because they look beautiful even before the harvest is finished. A pepper plant covered with green, yellow, orange, red, or purple fruit makes the container garden feel abundant without taking over the entire space. Now let's take the garden upward, because the next vegetable can turn one pot into a vertical harvest: cucumbers. Cucumbers are not the first crop many beginners think of for containers, because the vines can look wild. But with the right variety, the right pot, and a trellis, cucumbers can be one of the best examples of how a small patio does not have to stay flat. It can grow upward. That vertical habit is the whole opportunity. In the ground, cucumbers often sprawl. The vines run across soil, the fruit can hide under leaves, and cucumbers may rest on damp ground. In a container with a trellis, the plant is trained upward. The leaves catch light, the fruit hangs cleaner, and the gardener can see what is happening. This makes harvesting easier and can make a small space feel much more productive. But cucumbers are demanding container plants. They need a large enough pot, rich potting mix, steady moisture, and strong support. A cucumber in the wrong pot becomes a thirsty mess. The leaves wilt, the soil dries too fast, and the vine becomes a stress signal. Cucumbers produce a lot of leafy growth and fruit, and that takes water. A tiny container cannot buffer the plant through hot days. Variety choice helps. If your space is limited, look for compact, bush, patio, or container-friendly cucumber varieties. These are usually easier than trying to force a huge vining type into a small corner. Even compact cucumbers benefit from support, because lifting the plant improves airflow, keeps fruit visible, and saves ground space. Put the trellis in early, so you are not trying to untangle vines later. The container advantage with cucumbers is not that the crop becomes effortless. It is that the pot and trellis create a controlled vertical system. You know where the roots are. You know where to water. You know where the vine should climb. You can place the pot in strong sun, close to a water source, and somewhere you will check often. This matters because cucumbers can go from fine to thirsty very quickly in warm weather. Harvest timing is another reason containers can help. Cucumbers are best picked when they are still tender and before they become oversized. In a sprawling ground bed, fruit can hide. In a trellised container, you are more likely to notice them. Regular picking also encourages the plant to keep producing when conditions are right. The more visible the harvest, the more likely you are to maintain the habit. The mistakes are predictable: pot too small, no trellis, irregular watering, and letting fruit get too old on the vine. Avoid those, and cucumbers can transform a patio corner. One pot, one trellis, and a healthy vine can create a wall of leaves and hanging fruit that makes the space feel bigger than it is. And once you see how useful vertical space can be, the next crop becomes one of the simplest ways to keep harvesting from a container: bush beans. Bush beans are not always the loudest plants in a container garden, but they may be one of the most satisfying because you can see the harvest forming right in front of you. Unlike pole beans, which usually need taller support, bush beans stay more compact. That makes them easier to fit into a medium container on a patio, porch, or balcony. The reason bush beans can be better in pots is simplicity. They do not need the deep, heavy setup of tomatoes. They do not need the constant training of cucumbers. They do not need the same cool weather timing as lettuce or spinach. Give them a sunny position, decent soil, drainage, and enough space, and they can create a small but satisfying harvest station. In the ground, beans may compete with weeds, get splashed with soil, or become hard to reach if they are tucked into a crowded bed. In a container, the plant is raised and visible. You can see flowers forming. You can see small pods begin to lengthen. You can pick at the right stage, when the pods are tender, instead of discovering them too late. That visibility is a major advantage for beginners. Spacing matters. A container packed with too many bean plants may look full at first, but crowding reduces airflow and makes the plants compete. It is better to grow fewer plants well than to create a crowded pot that struggles. Bush beans like sun, and they appreciate steady watering, especially when flowering and setting pods. They do not want to sit in soggy soil, but they also should not be neglected until the leaves droop. The biggest harvest mistake is waiting too long. Beans that stay on the plant too long become tougher and can slow the plant's desire to make more tender pods. When you grow bush beans in a pot right where you can see them, you are more likely to pick regularly. That regular attention is the difference between a container that produces and a container that simply looks green for a while. Bush beans show that a container garden does not have to be dramatic to be productive. Sometimes one simple pot, placed in strong light and checked often, can give you the satisfaction of picking dinner ingredients with your own hands. Now, let's go back to leafy greens, but this time with a vegetable that shows why being able to move a pot can matter: spinach. Spinach is different from peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers because it is not looking for the hottest, brightest summer position. Spinach generally prefers cooler conditions. This is exactly why containers can be useful. For spinach, the container advantage is not just soil, it is mobility. In the ground, spinach is stuck where you plant it. If the weather turns warmer, if the afternoon sun becomes too strong, or if the bed dries faster than expected, you have fewer options. In a pot, you can place spinach where it receives morning sun and some protection later in the day. You can shift it away from reflected heat. You can grow it closer to the house where you remember to water. You can manage it as a tender green instead of forcing it to survive a stressful spot. Spinach likes consistent moisture and good drainage. That combination can be hard in poor soil. Heavy ground may stay too wet. Sandy ground may dry too quickly. A container with quality potting mix gives you a more balanced root zone. Because spinach does not require a huge, deep container, it can fit well into small space gardens, especially during cooler parts of the growing season. The harvest style also suits containers. You can cut outer leaves or harvest baby leaves, depending on how you grow it. A pot of spinach near your kitchen can become a source of small, frequent harvests rather than a big one-time crop. That is one of the secrets of successful container gardening. Choose plants you will actually notice and use. The common mistake is treating spinach like a heat-loving summer crop. If you place it on a scorching patio in full afternoon sun during hot weather, it may bolt, wilt, or become bitter. Another mistake is letting the pot dry out completely. Leafy greens do not have deep reserves. They respond quickly to stress. The container gives you control, but you still have to use that control. Spinach teaches an important lesson. Pots are not only useful because they can warm soil or save space. They are useful because they let you match a plant to a microclimate. A few feet can make a difference. Morning sun instead of afternoon heat can make a difference. Being able to move the pot before the plant suffers can make a difference. And for the final vegetable, we are going to the one that may be the easiest to keep harvesting without starting over again and again. Green onions. Green onions may not look as exciting as tomatoes, peppers, or cucumbers, but they are one of the most practical vegetables you can grow in a pot. They need little space, they can grow in a modest container, and they are useful in the kitchen again and again. For many beginner gardeners, green onions are the crop that makes the whole container garden feel manageable. The reason green onions can be better in pots is convenience. If they are near the kitchen, you will use them. You can step outside with scissors, cut what you need, and leave the plants to continue growing when they are healthy and well cared for. This is not the kind of harvest that fills a basket, but it is the kind of harvest that changes daily cooking. Soups, eggs, noodles, salads, rice bowls, tacos, and roasted vegetables all become more interesting when fresh green onions are close by. Green onions also tolerate the small space mindset better than many crops. They do not need a huge container like tomatoes. They do not need a tall trellis like cucumbers. They do not need perfect deep soil like carrots. They simply need decent potting mix, drainage, light, and consistent moisture. You can grow them in a small to medium pot, a window box, or a long narrow container if the drainage is good. In the ground, green onions can get lost, crowded by weeds, or forgotten. In a pot, they stay organized. You know where they are. You can keep them close. You can harvest without walking into the garden. That closeness makes them more valuable than they appear. The best vegetable is often not the most dramatic one. It is the one you actually keep using. The mistakes are simple but important. Do not let the container dry out completely again and again. Do not pack the plants so tightly that airflow disappears. Do not cut so low every time that the plants have no energy left to regrow. And do not expect one small pot to feed you like a full onion bed. Think of green onions as a steady kitchen helper, not a giant harvest crop. Green onions teach one of the most important lessons in container gardening. Repeat harvests matter. A vegetable does not have to be huge to be worth growing. If it saves you a trip to the store, adds freshness to meals, and keeps producing from a small space, it has earned its place. So now that we have all 10 vegetables, let's make this practical. Which ones should you start with if you only have a few pots? If you want the fastest confidence, start with lettuce, radishes, and green onions. These give you visible progress, simple care, and useful harvests without needing the biggest containers. If you want plants you will use in everyday cooking, start with herbs, green onions, and lettuce. Those three can sit close to the kitchen and turn a tiny patio into something you interact with almost daily. If you want the container garden to look beautiful and feel abundant, choose tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, but only if you can give them enough sun, enough root space, and steady watering. These are more demanding, but they create the strongest visual payoff. A tomato with fruit, a pepper plant full of color, and a cucumber climbing a trellis can make a small space feel like a real food garden. If your biggest problem is bad garden soil, consider radishes, mini carrots, lettuce, and herbs. These crops show the value of fresh potting mix, loose texture, and weed-free growing. If your space is very small, focus on herbs, lettuce, green onions, and bush beans. If your patio gets strong summer sun, peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, and beans may be more appropriate than cool season greens, as long as you can keep the containers watered. The goal is not to fill your patio with random pots. The goal is to choose vegetables that make the pot an advantage. A pot is not automatically better than the ground. A tiny pot with poor soil and no drainage is worse than a good garden bed. But a well-chosen container, filled with the right mix, placed in the right light, and matched with the right vegetable, can solve problems the ground cannot solve for you. Before you buy seeds or seedlings, think through 4 simple container rules. First, match the container to the root system. Leafy greens can use wide, shallower space, while tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and carrots need more serious root room. Second, use potting mix rather than heavy garden soil in most containers, because the whole advantage is loose texture and drainage. Third, put the plant where its light needs match the day, not just where the pot looks pretty. A beautiful corner is not useful if it is too shady for fruiting crops or too hot for tender greens. Fourth, make watering easy. If the pot is hard to reach, you will ignore it on the day it needs you most. These rules are not fancy, but they decide whether a container feels like freedom or frustration. A good pot should make the crop easier to manage. It should not become a tiny prison where roots dry out, leaves wilt, and the gardener wonders what went wrong. When the container is large enough, has drainage, holds the right soil, and sits in the right light, it becomes a tool. And for the vegetables in this video, that tool can sometimes beat the ground. That is the real message of this list. Lettuce benefits from mobility and gentle conditions. Herbs benefit from being close and frequently harvested. Radishes benefit from loose soil. Mini carrots benefit from depth without rocks. Tomatoes benefit from controlled soil and serious support. Peppers benefit from warmth and steady care. Cucumbers benefit from vertical growing. Bush beans benefit from visibility and easy picking. Spinach benefits from mobility away from stress. Green onions benefit from convenience and repeat harvests. You do not need to grow all 10 at once. In fact, you probably should not, unless you already have the space, containers, soil, and time to care for them. Start with the plants that match your life. If you only have one sunny corner, choose one crop that loves that corner. If you only have a small balcony, choose crops that stay compact. If you forget to water, begin with fewer pots, not more. Container gardening rewards attention, and attention is easier when the garden is small enough to understand. And this is why container gardening works so well for small spaces. It does not ask you to become a perfect gardener overnight. It asks you to notice one plant, one pot, one problem, and one improvement at a time. That is a much easier way to learn. And it is often the way people finally begin to enjoy growing food. A productive garden does not always begin with more land. Sometimes it begins with one good pot, the right soil, and a vegetable that grows better when you can control its little world. So before you look at your small patio, balcony, porch, or backyard corner and think it is not enough, ask a better question. Which vegetable would actually be happier here, in a pot where I can give it exactly what it needs?